In episode 12, after cultivating the 7th layer of the Little Big Dipper star origin art, Han Li illegally entered the Immortal realm through a spatial node. However, just as he arrived at the border region of the Immortal realm, he was accidentally swept into an extremely mysterious small space. Everyone is invited to follow the developments that come next. Boom boom boom, attacks launched simultaneously by 4 fusion stage alien cultivators blasted straight toward Han Li. Yet a faint, silvery light screen appeared around his body and effortlessly knocked away all incoming attacks and magical treasures, leaving his body completely unaffected. How is that possible? All 4 of them changed color at once and cried out in shock. Han Li immediately sensed something amiss. Without giving them any chance to react, he flicked his hand. The 2 short spears in his grasp instantly transformed into 2 blue streaks, shooting out at extreme speed and piercing straight through the chests of the bald-headed brute and another alien. The 2 struck by the blue streaks immediately erupted in dazzling white light, but they were utterly unable to block the attack. Carrying terrifying force, the short spears pierced through and shredded their bodies. Even their nascent souls had no time to escape and vanished on the spot. In almost a single breath, both were completely annihilated. Immediately after, in front of the remaining 2 aliens, 2 indistinct fist shadows suddenly appeared, moving as fast as lightning. Neither of them had time to react and could only hastily summon a layer of white light to form light shields. Boom boom. The light shields shattered with ease. The fist shadows continued onward and slammed straight into their bodies. 2 heavy impacts rang out as their bodies instantly exploded, flesh and blood spraying across the sky. From the moment the opponents attacked to the instant Han Li lifted a hand and took a step to exterminate the 4 fusion stage aliens, no more than a single breath had passed. By then, Donghua had already recovered from his shock. Without another word, he immediately transformed into a white-red streak of light and fled toward the distance at astonishing speed. At the same time, radiance flared from his wrist, forming several layers of light barriers around his body, which were then further covered by a gleaming suit of armor. But at that very moment, Han Li suddenly let out a soft snort. Donghua, who had already fled several hundred zhang away, abruptly felt a violent pain in his head, causing his escaping light to halt. His body wavered and fell from midair. Right afterward, a seemingly ordinary emerald jade pendant on Donghua's body suddenly shattered, turning into countless fine needles that plunged straight into his head. Donghua immediately felt a cool sensation in his mind, his consciousness clearing once more. However, a figure suddenly flickered before him. Han Li had seized that brief opening to cross the 100 zhang distance and appeared directly in front of his opponent. 7 blue lights lit up across Han Li's chest and abdomen, his arms thickening as he clenched his fist and struck forward. Donghua panicked. Almost without thinking, he hurriedly swung a blue greatsaber to block in front of himself. Clang! His body was instantly blasted away like a torn sack. The great saber in his hand shattered into fragments. The multiple layers of light barriers around him collapsed with loud crashes, and even the armor on his body split with countless cracks. Han Li frowned slightly, showing a trace of surprise. But his figure immediately blurred, reappearing once more before Donghua as he unleashed another ferocious punch. Terrifying brute force roared forth, causing the surrounding void itself to tremble violently. The remnants of Donghua's armor and the white light gathered around him shattered like eggshells in an instant. He did not even have time to let out a scream before his body and nascent soul were smashed to pieces. A gleaming blue bracelet shot out from the debris and flew back, landing in Han Li's palm. After releasing his divine sense to inspect it briefly, he immediately stored it in his storage pouch, then descended calmly to the ground below. On the plaza, the once crowded scene fell deathly silent. Both the Hangsing clan and Wumeng Island stood slack-jawed, frozen in place. Having long ceased fighting, they were completely shaken by the display of might just now. The ancestral god's might was overwhelming, slaughtering like splitting bamboo, driving all alien races from Wumeng Island. Luo Feng was the first to react, immediately letting out a jubilant shout. The people of Wumeng Island quickly regained their composure as well, roaring in unison with sky-shaking fervor, their momentum like a rainbow as they charged desperately to attack the Hangsing clan. Although the alien race had slightly greater numbers, their clan leader and the 4 strongest fighters had been slain. Like a snake without a head, they had completely lost the will to fight and retreated in rapid defeat. Naturally, Han Li had no interest in pursuing the remaining Hangsing clan straggler. His figure flickered as he descended onto the plaza, calmly collecting the storage pouches of the fallen fusion stage aliens one by one. At this moment, on the plaza, aside from a few clansmen still chasing the enemy and not yet returned, nearly everyone was staring intently at Han Li. Suddenly, someone shouted at the top of their lungs, "Welcome the descent of the ancestral god, Chua, Shua." Everyone dropped to their knees at once, shouting incessantly. Clan leader Luo Feng also bowed respectfully to the ground. Those who had survived the great battle were overjoyed beyond measure. Many could not restrain themselves and sobbed softly. Most people looked at Han Li with expressions of reverence and awe, like mortals gazing upon a deity. Han Li looked over the crowd, his expression exceedingly calm. He did not immediately declare that he was not the ancestral god, nor did he rashly accept this identity. He merely moved his lips slightly, transmitting a few words to clan leader Luo Feng. Hearing this, Luo Feng, who was kneeling on the ground, immediately stood up and carefully instructed the surrounding crowd. Elder Hu, you are responsible for treating the wounded and tallying the clan's losses. Elder Qi, take charge of vigilance in case the alien race returns. I will accompany the ancestral god to the ancestral god pavilion. Without my order, no one is allowed to approach. Everyone respectfully acknowledged the command in unison. Ancestral god, please come this way. Luo Feng bowed slightly, gesturing an invitation, then led Han Li toward the rear of the incomplete statue. Seeing this, the surrounding clansmen hurriedly bent their bodies and retreated, making way for them. As the two walked only a short distance, the clansmen on the plaza shouted together as if by prior agreement, "Sending off the ancestral god!" The sound was exceptionally thunderous, repeated several times, until the figures of the two gradually disappeared toward the distant mountains, at which point it slowly faded away. Throughout the entire journey, Han Li never once looked back, and his steps did not hesitate in the slightest. Following a winding stone path through the forest, the two arrived before an ancient-style grand hall atop the mountain. The hall was over 10 jang tall, not particularly lofty compared to ordinary palaces. Its surrounding walls were pitch black, seemingly constructed from some kind of black stone native to the island. The surface was covered with traces of erosion left by the passage of time, yet the paint on the windows, pillars, and corridors remained extremely fresh, clearly maintained and repaired on a regular basis. In front of the hall was a modest plaza. The corridors and stone steps below were all swept spotlessly clean, with scarcely a fallen leaf in sight. Han Li raised his head and looked toward the entrance, where he saw a black plaque hanging above the doorway, bearing large golden characters in ancient script. Ancestral God Pavilion. Luo Feng hurried forward, bowed respectfully, then pushed open the doors. The doors let out a dry creaking sound as they opened. Luo Feng stepped aside and gestured, inviting Han Li to enter. Stepping into the hall, Han Li saw a black stone statue of a true immortal. Judging solely by its bearing and facial features, the statue bore a resemblance to him of at least 30%. Han Li observed it for a moment, then withdrew his gaze and turned to look at the refined-looking man standing behind him, speaking directly to the point. "If there are only the two of us here, you and I, then I'll make things clear. I am not some ancestral god as you claim. Appearing here today was merely an accident." Upon hearing this, Luo Feng's face immediately filled with fear. He hurriedly knelt to the ground again and said in a trembling voice, "Ancestral god, if not for your true body descending upon Umeng Island today, our entire clan would surely have met with annihilation. We earnestly beg you not to abandon us now. For tens of thousands of years, our whole clan has faithfully worshipped you. We implore you to continue sheltering and protecting us. If those people had not come provoking me for no reason today, I would not have acted either. You need not feel indebted because of this. As the clan leader, you know very well in your own heart that I am not your ancestral god. Do not harbor false hopes that I will block the impending calamity for you," Han Li said coldly. Luo Feng's body trembled. Fear initially showed on his face, but it soon turned into a helpless, bitter smile. In truth, no matter who Senior is, it isn't important. As long as you are willing to continue bearing the identity of our ancestral god and stay to help us overcome this crisis, we are willing to devote the strength of the entire clan and offer all our cultivation resources to you. Tell me first, who exactly is the ancestral god you worship? Han Li's expression shifted slightly. Instead of answering, he suddenly asked in return. The ancestral god we worship is indeed an immortal. Several 100,000 years ago, he successfully completed his cultivation and has protected our clan and this land for generations, Luo Feng said after a brief pause, explaining carefully. In other words, those alien beings who invaded you today also have an ancestral god they worship. The layer of white light enveloping their bodies, does it have something to do with that ancestral god's protection? Han Li pondered briefly and asked. That's correct. However, the ancestor of the Hangsing clan only attained the Great Tao a little over 100,000 years ago, becoming an Earth Immortal. As far as I know, among the many ancestral gods, his strength is only of middling rank. He was even inferior to our ancestral god of Omeng Island in the past, Luo Feng said resentfully. What is an Earth Immortal? Han Li frowned slightly. Senior doesn't know about Earth Immortals? Could it be that you have just ascended from the lower realm? Luo Feng asked in surprise. Han Li did not respond, merely gazing calmly at him. Luo Feng immediately realized his misstep and dared not ask further, hastily explaining, Earth Immortals cultivate immortal power by absorbing the power of faith from believers within the territory they protect. Generally speaking, the larger the protected region, and the greater the number of believers, The faster the cultivation speed, and the stronger their divine abilities. Tell me more about the Hangsing clan, Han Li said thoughtfully, giving a light nod as he changed the subject. In reply to Senior, the Hangsing clan is like our own. Both are small clans on the fringe of the Black Wind Sea. Their island is relatively close to Umeng Island. Because of competition over resources, conflicts between our two clans have never been few. When our clan was at its peak, they naturally did not dare act rashly. Now that our ancestral god is resting and is not yet awakened, their greed has surfaced. Luo Feng replied respectfully. After listening, Han Li did not ask anything further right away, but fell into silent contemplation. Seeing this, Luo Feng, naturally, did not dare speak again, and simply stood to the side with his head lowered, waiting. After a long while, Han Li finally spoke again. Then what is the distance from the Black Wind Sea to the Northern Cold Immortal Domain? As far as this junior knows, the Black Wind Sea is part of the Northern Cold Immortal Domain, but it is only a tiny and remote region. Oh, right, this is a map of the Black Wind Sea. Please allow Senior to examine it. Luo Feng said after a brief hesitation, then took out a large white pearl about the size of a peach pit and handed it to Han Li. Han Li accepted the pearl, closed his eyes slightly, and with a gentle movement of his divine sense, entered it. A short while later, he slowly opened his eyes, a complex expression appearing within them. After pondering for a long time, he finally said slowly, "If you want me to protect your Umeng Island, it is not impossible. But there are a few things I must state beforehand." "Please speak, Senior. There is no need to hold back," Luo Feng replied, overjoyed. "What you said earlier was correct. I have indeed just entered the Immortal Realm and did not undergo guidance at the Ascension platform. If you harbor any reservations because of this, I will not take offense." "We can simply treat this matter as if it never happened," Han Li said frankly, without concealing anything. "I wouldn't dare. For Senior to be so forthright, this junior is already deeply grateful," Luo Feng said repeatedly, waving his hands. "In that case, in front of others, you may continue to address me as Ancestral God. When no one is around, you may call me Senior Lu. If the Hangsing clan dares to invade again, I will take action. When that time comes, do not forget what you promised to offer," Han Li said indifferently. Upon hearing this, Luo Feng was instantly overjoyed beyond measure. "That is only natural, only natural. Very well, arrange a quiet place for me. I need to rest for a while," Han Li said, giving a slight nod. "Senior Lu, please follow me," Luo Feng replied, then led Han Li through the inner hall of the Ancestral God Pavilion toward the rear courtyard. Leaving the rear courtyard, the two passed through a bamboo grove filled with purple mist, then arrived before a small courtyard with white walls and black tiles. This place was where this junior previously cultivated. Whenever I encountered a bottleneck, I would enter seclusion here. No one dares to disturb it, so Senior may stay here with peace of mind," Luo Feng said. Han Li glanced over the small courtyard before him, nodded lightly, and walked ahead into the inner yard. About half a day later, in a deep blue sea region, tens of thousands of miles away from Umeng Island, there stood a white island several hundred zhang tall. Its area was comparable to that of Umeng Island, yet it was long and narrow like a willow leaf. Vegetation on the island was extremely sparse, and gray-white jagged rocks were exposed everywhere, reflecting the sunlight. On the island, white-domed buildings were densely distributed along the mountain terrain. The higher one went, the fewer the buildings became, and the sparser their distribution. At the highest point, there were no structures at all, only a diamond-shaped plaza several hundred zhang wide, stretching along the mountain ridge. The ground of the plaza was carved everywhere, with long, narrow, arc-shaped or circular patterns, intricately connected into an exceptionally beautiful formation diagram. At the center of the formation stood a gray-white statue more than 10 zhang tall. It had a robust build, wore armor engraved with exquisite patterns, and its face was also covered by a layer of armor. Two sharp, curved fangs extended outward from both sides of the faceplate, and long hair flowed back over its shoulders. At a glance, it appeared extraordinarily imposing. At this moment, a ring of Blue Star Clan members were kneeling prostrate around the statue. All of them had their heads lowered, arms crossed, and hands resting on their shoulders, silently chanting as they carried out some sort of ritual. After a while, two streams of blue light suddenly flared up from the faceplate of the gray-white statue. Immediately afterward, a humming voice echoed from within the statue. "How have things gone? Why don't I see Tu-Ha?" A slightly plump Blue Star Clan elder, his face filled with grief, stepped forward, cupped his hands, and said, "Reporting to Ancestral God." Then, after wiping the sweat from his temples, he recounted the general course of events. "Clan leader Tu-Ha and several elders have all fallen in battle. Ancestral God, you must uphold justice for us." Silence filled the vast hall. A moment later, the humming voice rang out again from the gray-white statue. Cold and resolute, "You say Luo Meng's true body descended. That is absolutely impossible." If he had truly recovered from the severe injuries he suffered 10,000 years ago, given his temperament, he would never have allowed you to escape back alive. Moreover, based on your descriptions, that person did not even release the power of protection. The plump Blue Star clan elder hesitated, then asked, Ancestral God, if that is the case, should we reorganize our forces and attack Umeng Island once more? No need, the voice from the statue replied immediately. Although that person is not Luomeng, being able to easily kill Tu-Ha and the others means he is certainly no ordinary figure. If you go there again, it would be no different from seeking your own deaths. Withdraw for now. I will make arrangements for what follows. We obey, the plump elder said at once, lowering his head and leading the group of clansmen away. After they had gone far away, the voice from the statue sounded once more. This time, it was like a soft murmur, speaking to itself. Hey, hey, Haku, Hutu, Lu Kun, you have been eyeing that piece of meat called Umeng Island for a long time. If you want to come and share a bowl of soup, you will naturally have to put in some effort. However, that item can only belong to me alone. After all, whether I can successfully take the next step forward will depend entirely on staking everything on this thing. The voice gradually faded. The two streams of blue light on the statue slowly extinguished as well, and everything returned to silence. Within the small courtyard, Han Li continuously waved both hands. Streaks of blue light shot out one after another, transforming into blue formation flags that embedded themselves around the inner courtyard. The flags flashed briefly before vanishing, and immediately afterward, a faint, intermittently visible pale blue light screen appeared, enveloping the entire courtyard. After finishing the setup, Han Li sat down cross-legged and closed his eyes to regulate his breathing. Time slowly passed, the sky gradually darkened as night fell, and the starry sky emerged, filled with shimmering stars. Han Li opened his eyes, raised his head to glance at the night sky, then flipped his hand and took out a medicinal pill, placing it into his mouth and swallowing it. He then took a deep breath, and the Little Big Dipper star origin art within his body began to circulate. 7 faint blue points gradually appeared on his chest and abdomen, forming a stellar pattern. From the night sky, streams of starlight force converged, forming 7 pillars of starlight that descended from above and plunged into his body. Han Li's complexion turned slightly pale before gradually recovering. In the blink of an eye, the night passed and dawn arrived. Han Li opened his eyes and let out a long breath. At this moment, not only had the sense of fatigue in his body completely disappeared, but the injuries he had sustained from crossing the interplanar distance earlier had also fully recovered. He moved his body slightly, then turned and entered a room to the side within the inner courtyard. Before long, Han Li stood inside a room that was not very large, only about 7 or 8 zhang across. Aside from a green bamboo cabinet placed on each side and several wooden tables, there was only a meditation cushion in the center. Everything was neat and orderly, as if there were not a speck of dust. Han Li sat down cross-legged on the cushion and flipped his hand to take out a jade box. Opening it, he revealed an object about the size of a peach pit, yellow in color, with patterns on its surface that faintly formed a human face. It radiated an astonishingly strong Earth attribute spiritual aura that fluctuated incessantly. This was precisely the peach pit from the strange tree that he had obtained earlier from the mysterious bubble space. At the time, he had been in a hurry and had no chance to examine it carefully. Now that he finally had some leisure, he began to probe it slowly. Han Li released his divine sense and examined the interior of the peach pit. Just upon observing it, his heart jolted. The Earth attribute spiritual aura contained within was so dense as to be almost unbelievable, as if it were about to overflow, yet it was compressed to the extreme, completely condensed within this single fruit pit. With Han Li's experience in distinguishing spiritual herbs and materials, especially his ability to judge medicinal age, although he could not identify the origin of this peach pit, he knew very well that to compress heaven and earth spiritual aura to such a state, its medicinal age had to be at least over 100,000 years. However, this alone still did not seem sufficient to cause 2 true immortal-level demonic beasts to fight over it. With this thought, Han Li continued to use his divine sense to meticulously probe every inch of the peach pit's interior. After more than 10 rounds of examination, he finally discovered a trace of something unusual. Although the Earth attribute spiritual aura inside the peach pit appeared chaotic and without order, like surging waves interweaving with one another, there faintly seemed to be some kind of underlying pattern. It was as if at regular intervals, these spiritual aura fluctuations entered a state of interlaced fusion. Extremely bizarre. Moreover, within those fluctuations, there was an exceedingly tiny trace of a special aura spreading out. Could it be? Han Li's heart pounded several times. This special aura seemed somewhat similar to the power of laws, yet it was not exactly the same. He examined it carefully once more, but for the time being, he was still unable to completely confirm his conjecture. After pondering for a moment, Han Li flipped his hand and took out another wooden box. Opening the lid, Inside was a golden miniature figure with several talismans affixed to its body. It was the nascent soul of the one-eyed giant, the former master of the mysterious bubble space. The little figure had only a single eye, half closed and half open, its gaze dull and vacant. Han Li reached out and grabbed the nascent soul. At the same time, a streak of black light appeared on his other finger and directly entered it, beginning a soul search. To uncover the secret of this bizarre human-faced peach pit, soul searching was clearly the fastest route. A shocked expression appeared on the previously blank face of the giant's nascent soul. It struggled slightly as a layer of yellow radiance rose from its body and rapidly flashed. Han Li frowned, discovering that there seemed to be some strange force within the nascent soul that sealed its spirit, making it very difficult for his divine sense to penetrate. He snorted coldly. The black light on his finger immediately brightened as he gradually increased the intensity of the soul search. The yellow radiance on the nascent soul suddenly flared violently. The tiny face revealed an expression of agony as it opened its mouth to scream, but due to the suppression of the talismans, no sound could escape. A trace of joy arose in Han Li's heart. His spiritual will had finally broken through that strange sealing layer and touched the spirit within. However, at that very moment, his expression suddenly changed. A faint, hazy film abruptly appeared around the nascent soul's body. Almost immediately afterward, an incomparably dazzling burst of yellow radiance erupted from within it. Boom! A loud explosion rang out. The yellow radiance transformed into a sunlight golden light that engulfed Han Li's entire body. The yellow light quickly contracted, turning into countless pale golden rays that drifted away and dissipated. Han Li's figure still stood in place, completely unharmed, though his expression was somewhat unsightly. He had not expected the strange force within the one-eyed giant's nascent soul to be so domineering. After his divine sense broke through, it immediately self-destructed, leaving him no time to obtain much information. He could only glimpse a few brief, fragmented memories roughly that, after wandering for more than 10,000 years, the giant had once swallowed a human-faced peach pit, and that item was of enormous benefit to cultivation. Han Li let out a soft sigh, glanced at the human-faced peach pit for a moment, then flipped his hand and put it away. It seemed that he could only find another method to determine this item's origin. At present, having just returned to the Immortal Realm, he still had more important matters to attend to. He composed himself, stood up, and walked out of the small courtyard. "Greetings, Senior Lu." Outside the courtyard, a refined-looking man stood waiting. It was Luo Feng. "Clan leader Luo Feng, why are you here?" A trace of surprise flashed in Han Li's eyes as he asked calmly. "I came to see whether Senior has grown accustomed to this residence." "Oh right, these are some cultivation resources that our clan gathered day and night according to Senior's request. Because time was short, we were only able to collect this much. Others have already been dispatched to gather more elsewhere," Luo Feng said, then took out a black bracelet and presented it with both hands. Han Li reached out to accept it, swept it with his divine sense, and nodded lightly. Only then did Luo Feng quietly let out a breath of relief. "You came at the right time. There should be something like a library or archive here among your people. I want to read a few things," Han Li said. "Yes, Senior Lu, please follow me." Luo Feng replied at once, then flew ahead to lead the way. The two of them flew up into the air. Han Li's gaze swept across the surroundings once. The great battle from yesterday had caused damage in many places that now needed repairs. Quite a few collapsed buildings were being reconstructed. The harbor was currently devoid of people, but farther away, there were still several towns scattered around the island. Within those towns were many mortals with no cultivation at all. Although yesterday's great battle caused damage over a wide area, its impact on the towns of mortals was not particularly severe. At this moment, the mortals in the towns, along with some cultivators, were gathered together, carrying out rituals before the ancestral god statue of Omeng Island. Noticing Han Li's gaze, Luo Feng explained, "In this Blackwind Sea region, there are quite a few mortals living on the islands. The families on each island rely on cultivators for protection. During yesterday's great battle, all the mortals were taken away and hidden in various protected locations. Although cultivators frequently fight among themselves, they generally do not take action against mortals." Han Li nodded lightly. The situation here reminded him of the chaotic Star Sea back then. After a short while, the two arrived before a two-story pavilion building that covered a fairly large area. Ancestral God. When the clan leader and several void refinement stage cultivators guarding the building saw Luo Feng and Han Li descend, they hurried forward to pay their respects, their expressions extremely reverent. Luo Feng ignored them and directly led Han Li into the first floor. Inside the library pavilion, rows of bookshelves were neatly arranged, holding all kinds of ancient books, scrolls, and quite a few jade slips. Han Li looked around and discovered that the scale of this library was not large. It was considerably smaller than the scripture repository of the Cold Flame sect from years past. "Senior, our clan's strength is weak, and the number of texts we have collected is relatively small. Please forgive us for making Senior laugh. The first floor mainly contains cultivation techniques and various miscellaneous records. The second floor holds some texts related to magic treasures and alchemy, Luo Feng said apologetically. It's fine. You don't need to stay here. Oming Island needs rebuilding everywhere right now. Go attend to your own matters, Han Li said indifferently. Yes. Luo Feng was slightly taken aback, then immediately agreed and turned to leave the pavilion. Han Li walked to the bookshelves one by one, his hands clasped behind his back, slowly examining them. Relying on his powerful divine sense, his speed in reading through the text was extremely fast. The texts collected by Umang Island were rather disorganized. On this first floor, the majority consisted of information about the Black Wind Sea region, along with some cultivation techniques for the Great Ascension realm. What Han Li most wanted to understand were materials related to Earth Immortals, but unfortunately, records concerning Immortals here were exceedingly scarce. However, after flipping through nearly the entire first floor, he finally found several old jade slips that recorded some content related to Earth Immortals. Nearly half an hour later, Han Li set down the last jade slip in his hand and slowly opened his eyes. Although the contents of those few jade slips were limited, they ultimately gave him a relatively clear understanding of Earth Immortals and the ancestral god worshipped by Umang Island. According to the records, Earth Immortals were also a type of immortal within the immortal realm, but their method of cultivation was extremely special. Earth Immortals could rely on the power of faith from believers to condense the power of laws. However, this method of relying on external forces had very great limitations. First, Earth Immortals could only wield the power of laws within regions that possessed faith power. Once they left those regions, the power of laws would almost completely lose its effectiveness. Second, because they needed to condense faith power, all Earth Immortals had to use special materials to refine a statue. This statue would contain and refine the power of faith, thereby forming a special Earth manifestation avatar belonging exclusively to that Earth Immortal. When this Earth manifestation avatar used the power of laws, its might could even surpass that of the main body. Under normal circumstances, the Earth Immortal's true body would remain hidden, allowing only the Earth manifestation avatar to act outside. Once this avatar was destroyed, the Earth Immortal's true body would suffer severe injury and might even lose the ability to use the power of laws, causing all prior accumulation to be ruined in an instant. Earth Immortals? Power of laws? Han Li's eyes flickered as he murmured softly. Han Li stood there for a moment, then gathered his thoughts and continued walking along the bookshelves in the library pavilion. He took down several more miscellaneous texts and quickly flipped through them. Most of the content consisted of scattered records about the Black Wind Sea region, the distribution of islands, and some legends related to the ancestral gods of the small clans in the area. Among them were a few passages mentioning that at the border of the Black Wind Sea, Earth Immortals had once erupted into great battles over the struggle for faith power. As a result, the sea region was shaken, many islands sank to the seabed, and countless mortals and cultivators perished. In the end, those Earth Immortals were all heavily injured and had to go into hiding for many years, not daring to reveal themselves. Although these records were very cursory, they nonetheless made Han Li secretly vigilant. He became even more certain that his temporary use of the ancestral god identity on Omang Island absolutely could not be prolonged for too long. After that, Han Li left the first floor and went up to the second floor of the library pavilion. The second floor was much quieter, with fewer bookshelves, but what they held were mostly ancient scrolls and jade slips of considerable age. Han Li did not linger long over the texts on magic treasures and alchemy. Instead, he primarily searched for records related to the Northern Cold Immortal Domain, the Ascension Platform, and the basic rules of the Immortal Realm. After a while, he found several texts of value, then sat down beside a wooden table and began reading carefully. According to the records in the texts, anyone who ascended from the lower realms to the Immortal Realm had to pass through the Ascension Platform to register their identity and receive an Immortal Register before being permitted to move freely within the Immortal Realm. Those who entered the Immortal Realm without passing through the Ascension Platform would be regarded as illegal ascenders. Once discovered by major powers, the lightest punishment would be detention and investigation, while the most severe would be immediate extermination on the spot. In addition, the text clearly recorded that the Northern Cold Immortal Domain was one of the major immortal domains of the Immortal Realm. Its power structure was complex, containing many major sects and clans, some of which controlled the Ascension platforms within the region. As expected, troublesome, Han Li murmured softly, his expression darkening. He had already anticipated that not passing through the Ascension platform would bring considerable trouble. Now it seemed that, for the foreseeable future, he absolutely could not leave the Black Wind Sea region, much less reveal himself openly. Han Li continued reading for a while longer. After confirming that there were no more texts of particular value, he stood up and slowly left the library pavilion. By the time he exited the building, the sky was already slanting toward evening. Han Li raised his head and looked into the distance, a thoughtful expression appearing in his eyes. After a moment, he withdrew his gaze, his figure flickered, and he flew back toward the small courtyard. As soon as he landed before the courtyard gate, he discovered that the formation light screen was still operating normally, with no signs of disturbance. Han Li nodded lightly and walked inside. He sat down cross-legged in the inner courtyard, flipped his hand to take out several spirit stones and a bottle of pills, placing them to the side as he prepared to continue regulating his breathing and cultivating. At present, for him, the most important matter was to restore himself to peak condition as soon as possible, while also gaining a clear understanding of the immortal realm in preparation for his next step. Night fell swiftly. Inside the small courtyard, a hazy formation mist quietly spread out, concealing all the auras within. Han Li sat cross-legged in the middle of the courtyard, his eyes half closed, his breathing long and steady. As the incantation of the Little Big Dipper's star origin art circulated, 7 faint points of starlight gradually appeared on his chest and abdomen. In the night sky, the starlight suddenly grew a few degrees brighter. Threads of extremely fine stellar energy pierced through the clouds and slowly descended into the small courtyard. The moment the starlight entered his body, Han Li's complexion turned slightly pale, but it quickly returned to normal. He did not dare absorb too much at once. Forcibly assimilating stellar energy while his foundation was still unstable could easily lead to backlash, especially when his nascent soul was still sealed. After about half a watch, Han Li opened his eyes and exhaled a breath of turbid air. Although the stellar energy within his body had increased by only a very small amount, it was extremely pure, making his condition more stable than during the day. To fully recover, it seems time is still needed. Han Li murmured softly, then stood up and walked into the adjacent room. Inside the room, he laid out several jade boxes. After opening the lids, the items obtained from the previous battle with the alien cultivators at the integration stage were revealed spirit stones, magic treasures, pills, and some rare materials. Han Li only gave the magic treasures a cursory glance before setting them aside. Although they were not bad, they were of limited value to him in his current state. His gaze quickly settled on a gray jade slip. Han Li picked up the jade slip, and with a slight movement of his divine sense, probed its contents. After only a short moment, his brows furrowed. The jade slip recorded an extremely simple reconnaissance secret technique, specifically used to detect residual traces of faith power in areas where Earth Immortals had once been active. Somewhat interesting. After a brief consideration, Han Li decided to give it a try. He put away the items, left the small courtyard, and quietly rose into the air, heading toward the forbidden seabed area to the northwest of Umang Island. Before long, he arrived at the familiar precipitous cliff. Without alerting anyone, Han Li directly slipped into the sealed opening, passed through the passageway, and entered the stone chamber where the ancestral god's skull was placed. The blue skull still rested silently upon the stone pedestal, its surface smooth like jade, faintly emitting water-attributed spiritual power. Han Li stood several steps away from the pedestal. With both hands forming seals, he began to execute the secret technique recorded in the jade slip. A faint halo spread out from between his brows, transforming into threads of light as fine as spider silk, slowly extending toward the skull. The moment those threads of light touched the skull, a sudden change occurred. The blue skull trembled slightly. Subtle ripples appeared on its surface, barely discernible to the naked eye. At the same time, within the air of the stone chamber, an extremely weak energy almost impossible to detect with ordinary divine sense began to gather. Han Li narrowed his eyes slightly. As expected, there is still some residue. According to his perception, those strands of energy were precisely the faith power accumulated over countless years by innumerable mortals and cultivators. Although it had weakened greatly, it had not completely dissipated. Han Li pondered for a moment, and a vague plan gradually took shape in his mind. If he could make use of this residual faith power and coordinate it with an Earth manifestation avatar, it might not be impossible to temporarily resolve the problem of his sealed magical power. Of course, this was an extremely risky path. With even the slightest mistake, he could be eroded by faith power and become permanently bound to the identity of an Earth Immortal. I can only calculate everything with the utmost care. Han Li withdrew the hand seals. The light around the skull gradually dissipated, and the stone chamber returned to its former stillness. He did not linger, turning around and leaving the forbidden area. After returning to the small courtyard, Han Li immediately sealed all restrictions, then sat down at the stone table. He took out paper and brush and began recording each step of the deductions in his mind. Time passed quietly. No one knew how long it took before the writing on the paper finally came to a stop. Han Li looked at the pile of messy notes before him, and his gaze gradually grew firm. First, I need a method to stabilize the Earth manifestation avatar, then a safe source of faith power, and finally, the matter of guiding the magical power back into the main body. He put away the paper and brush and gently closed his eyes. A new path lay before him, fraught with danger, yet also the only path available to him. Early the next morning, a light mist enveloped Umang Island, and the sea surface was unusually calm. Inside the small courtyard, Han Li had already opened his eyes. His expression was calm, but his gaze was noticeably deeper than before. He did not resume cultivation immediately. Instead, he stood up and slowly walked around the courtyard, carefully checking each layer of restrictions. Only after confirming that there were no signs of surveillance or intrusion did he return to the stone table and sit down cross-legged. With a flip of his hand, a streak of blue light flashed. It was the Jade Tome recording the Myriad Waters Immortal art. Han Li placed the Jade Tome in front of him, but did not read it right away. Instead, he closed his eyes and fell into deep thought. If I want to refine an Earth manifestation avatar, I must at least clearly understand how faith power and immortal spirit power operate for Earth immortals. He opened his eyes, and his divine sense probed into the Jade Tome. Compared to the last time, when he had only skimmed through it, this time Han Li read extremely slowly, almost savoring every single word. Although the Myriad Waters Immortal art was not suitable for him to cultivate in the long term, it recorded quite a few methods for transforming immortal spirit power and applying water-based laws. These were of great value for understanding the mechanisms of Earth immortals. Time passed bit by bit. At some unknown moment, the sound of the sea waves outside the courtyard grew more intense. Yet Han Li paid it no attention at all. In his mind, fragments of scattered knowledge gradually linked together. Earth immortals, Earth manifestation, avatars, faith, power, laws, none of these existed independently. Instead, they formed a tightly interwoven system that both supported and severely constrained one another. No wonder so few are willing to walk this path. Han Li shook his head lightly. Earth immortals appeared glorious on the surface. But in reality, they were tightly bound to their regions of faith. Once believers dwindled or the manifestation statue was destroyed, their cultivation would plummet without restraint. The more he read, the clearer it became in his mind. This path was something he could only borrow temporarily. He absolutely could not sink into it. After nearly half a day, Han Li closed the Jade Tome. A sharp glint flashed in his eyes as he flipped his hand and took out another jade, slipped the one recording the Severing Origin Heavenly Heart refinement. Without hesitation, he pressed the jade slip directly to his forehead. Compared to before, he read it even more carefully this time. Every formation diagram and every sealing incantation was engraved firmly in his mind, without missing a single detail. After a long while, Han Li lowered the jade slip and slowly exhaled. As expected, the chains of laws are not without a solution. According to his deductions, the 8 black chains sealing his nascent soul, though powerful, still required magical power and laws to maintain. As long as he could continuously generate a sufficiently large amount of magical power from outside his main body, the pressure on the seal would keep increasing. At that point, even if the other party had a way to reinforce the seal from afar, they might not be able to react in time. In other words, the Earth Manifestation Avatar is not just a source of magical power, but also bait. Han Li's gaze darkened. Once he truly began absorbing faith power, the person who had cast the seal on his nascent soul back then would very likely notice him once again. This was a gamble, but if he did not gamble, he would be bound to his current realm forever. Han Li stood up, left the small courtyard, and flew straight toward the main hall. Before long, his figure appeared before Luo Feng. The moment Luo Feng saw Han Li, he immediately bowed respectfully. Senor Liu. Han Li nodded and got straight to the point. Within the clan, how many mortals and cultivators worship the ancestral god each day? Luo Feng was slightly startled, but he still answered quickly. Mortals offer sacrifices almost every day. Cultivators are fewer, but at least once a month. If a major event occurs, the entire island will hold a ritual. Han Li pondered for a moment. For the time being, reduce the scale of the rituals, but do not cut them off completely. Only maintain the minimum necessary rites. Hearing this, Luo Feng was even more confused, but he did not dare ask further and merely lowered his head in response. Yes, senior. Han Li glanced at him and continued slowly. I need to borrow faith power, but it cannot be allowed to grow too quickly. This matter, you must personally supervise it. Upon hearing this, Luo Feng's heart shook violently. He vaguely sensed that Han Li was about to do something extremely significant. Something that might even be directly tied to the fate of Umeng Island. But in the end, he clenched his teeth and replied, I will definitely cooperate with all my strength. Han Li said nothing more and turned to leave. Watching Han Li's figure gradually disappear into the sky, Luo Feng stood there for a long time, his expression shifting repeatedly. An undercurrent was quietly gathering within the Blackwind Sea. Ma Guang suddenly interjected with a question, what is a loose immortal? Could it be the same as an immortal? Han Li was slightly startled upon hearing this and turned to ask in return. Ma Guang explained, people in the lower realms usually think that once you ascend to the immortal realm, everyone becomes a true immortal. But in reality, in the immortal realm, only those who possess the power of laws can be called true immortal. Immortals who do not control the power of laws can only be called loose immortals. There are extremely many loose immortals. This is what is meant by out of 10 immortals, 9 are loose. Ma Guang continued, Loose immortals cannot comprehend the power of laws and can only rely on painstaking cultivation of immortal spirit power to advance. But because they lack the protection of the power of laws, overcoming tribulations and advancing realms is far more difficult for them than for true immortals. Loose immortals? True immortals. Han Li murmured softly after hearing this. Ma Guang went on, ultimately speaking, the path you are currently walking, mysterious immortals, can also be considered a special type of loose immortal. Mysterious immortals mainly cultivate the physical body, using bodily strength to advance, without needing to grasp the power of laws. This type is extremely rare, even rarer than Earth immortals. So that's how it is. Han Li nodded slowly. Many thanks to fellow Taoist Ma Guang for clearing up my doubts. Ma Guang replied, although my divine soul is no longer intact, I still remember matters of the immortal realm clearly. If fellow Taoist has any questions, feel free to ask. After saying this, Ma Guang's figure flickered. Without waiting for Han Li to speak further, he merged directly into Han Li's shadow. Han Li stood still, his eyes narrowing slightly as he slowly digested the information he had just obtained. After a while, he let out a light breath, turned around, and went up to the second floor of the library pavilion. He picked up a tome and flipped through it page by page. The tome recorded that immortal artifacts were treasures that utilized the power of the laws of heaven and earth. Their transformations were ghostly and unpredictable, encompassing myriad methods, capable of breaking through all things. Han Li silently read a passage, and in his mind could not help but recall the profound heavenly Ruyi blade and the profound heavenly spirit. Severing sword, two profound heavenly treasures he had once used in the spirit realm. The profound heavenly spirit severing sword, as one of the top 3 treasures on the Chaos Myriad Spirit ranking, could ignore the laws of heaven and earth of a given realm. This point alone already made it somewhat similar to an immortal artifact. Thinking of this, Han Li continued to carefully read every single word on the page. About half a quarter hour later, he closed the tome, finally gaining a clear understanding of the concept of immortal artifacts. According to the records, profound heavenly treasures were in fact a type of treasure born from resonance with the power of a world. They originally belonged to a category of immortal artifacts in the immortal realm, known as innate immortal artifacts. Such treasures usually appeared during the primordial beginnings of a world, mostly in the form of wood spirits. After absorbing the essence of heaven and earth, these wood spirits could then ignore the laws of heaven and earth and produce spiritual flowers, or spiritual fruits. In an ordinary world, there would be at most 4 or 5 such treasures, all of them exceedingly precious. These spiritual woods had extremely long growth cycles, often requiring tens of thousands of years, or even over 100,000 years, before flowering and bearing fruit. However, the period of flowering and fruiting was extremely short, at most 1 or 2 days, and at the shortest, it would wither away in an instant. Precisely because the growth cycle was so long and the withering period so brief, obtaining spiritual flowers or fruits was nearly an impossible task. Aside from innate immortal artifacts, the tomes also recorded another type known as acquired immortal artifacts. These were not nurtured and born by heaven and earth, but were instead refined postnatally by immortals from treasures that contained the power of laws. Whether innate immortal artifacts or acquired immortal artifacts, both were rare treasures even within the immortal realm. Loose immortals could also possess immortal artifacts, but their numbers were extremely few. As for immortals capable of refining acquired immortal artifacts, they were even rarer, truly as scarce as phoenix feathers and Keelan horns. Reading up to this point, a trace of nostalgia could not help but rise in Han Li's heart for the profound heavenly spirit severing sword of years past. Han Li turned his head and looked straight at Luo Feng, getting directly to the point. On your Umeng Island, do you possess any immortal artifacts? Luo Feng gave a bitter smile and shook his head. Treasures like immortal artifacts are not something we are fortunate enough to possess. Back then, the ancestral god once intended to obtain one, but in the end, it did not succeed. In fact, not only Umeng Island, even in the entire Blackwind Sea, immortal artifacts can be counted on one hand. Han Li had not held much hope to begin with. Hearing this, he merely nodded lightly and continued. The ancient records say that an ancestral god can accumulate faith power to condense the power of laws. Back then, which laws did your ancestral god control? Luo Feng was momentarily taken aback, a hesitant look appearing on his face, but he quickly replied, Lord Luo Meng controlled laws mostly related to the power of water. Most of the ancestral gods in the surrounding areas are the same. Water power, Han Li pondered briefly, then suddenly recalled something and asked again. Earlier, on the way to the library pavilion, I saw many clansmen worshipping the ancestral god statue. Is that statue the Earth manifestation avatar of Umeng Island's ancestral god? Luo Feng shook his head. That ancestral god statue, like those on other islands, is merely an object used to collect faith power. Although it can communicate with the ancestral god, it is not an Earth manifestation avatar. The true Earth manifestation avatar of the ancestral god exists only in one form and is currently sealed within the clan's forbidden ground. Where's the forbidden ground? Han Li asked immediately. Luo Feng hesitated for a moment, then replied, I would not dare conceal this from Senior. Back then, the ancestral god's Earth manifestation avatar was gravely injured by a powerful enemy, and now only a skull remains. If Senior wishes to see it, this junior can lead the way. Take me there, Han Li said curtly. The two immediately left Omeng Island and flew toward the northwest. Before long, a precipitous cliff over 100 zhang tall appeared ahead. Below the cliff were jagged black reefs, with huge waves crashing endlessly against the shore, sending up white spray. The cliff face was riddled with countless holes of varying sizes, its surface covered with dark green seaweed and white salt stains, giving it a mottled appearance. The two hovered above the sea, facing the cliff. Senior Lu, this is where the Seabone Earth manifestation avatar of ancestral god Luo Meng is kept, Luo Feng said, raising his hand to point at an opening on the cliff that looked fairly ordinary, several zhang in size. The interior of the opening was pitch black, with nothing unusual visible on the surface. However, when Han Li released his divine sense to probe it, he immediately detected a strange force interfering, causing his divine sense to be diverted toward the side of the cliff. He let out a soft "oh," and a blue glow flickered in his pupils as he activated the bright clear spirit eyes to look inside the opening. Deep within, he saw a pale white mist vortex slowly rotating, from which emanated an extremely faint trace of law aura. Luo Feng sighed and said, after ancestral god Uming was severely injured and fell into slumber, this water origin seal has gradually weakened. If this continues for another 1,000 years, I fear the seal will no longer be able to conceal this place. As he spoke, he flew into the opening. His hands formed seals continuously before his chest, sending out streaks of blue light. The blue light entered the vortex, causing the mist to tremble, and a circular passageway as tall as a person opened from the center. Senior, please, Luo Feng said. His figure flashed and disappeared into the passage. Han Li followed closely behind and also flew inside. The passage was dim, constructed of green stone, winding and extending downward. Every few zhang, a white stone emitted a faint glow, illuminating the path ahead. The two descended silently. The deeper they went, the denser the surrounding water attribute spiritual energy became. After nearly a quarter of an hour, a blue stone door finally appeared ahead. Luo Feng took out a blue command token and gently shook it. A streak of azure light shot out and entered the stone door. Several sharp screeching sounds rang out as the stone door slowly opened. The stone door opened, revealing a square stone chamber spanning several dozen zhang. Calling it a stone chamber was not entirely accurate, as both the ground and the rock walls were naturally uneven, clearly transformed from a deep cavern beneath the seabed. From the ceiling, pale blue stalactites hung down, with mist curling about. Reflected light made the entire space resemble glazed crystal. On the surrounding rock walls was a similar translucent material, through which one could vaguely see the ocean currents outside flowing and pausing intermittently, making it clear that this place lay very deep beneath the sea. Han Li swept his gaze around and discovered that the chamber was empty, with almost no furnishings at all. At the center stood only a black stone pedestal about half a person tall. Countless small grooves were carved densely across its surface, winding in complex patterns that covered the entire pedestal. Resting atop the pedestal was a large skull statue nearly the size of a normal human head, with features that bore 3 parts resemblance to Han Li. The entire skull was a pale blue color, as if carved from some rare crystal. Its surface was smooth and glossy like a mirror, reflecting faint white light that shimmered around it, while a dense water-attributed spiritual power continuously radiated outward. The neck portion of the skull had been severed cleanly, the cut rough and terrifying to behold, clearly torn away from its body by force. Han Li stood not far from the skull, his gaze fixed upon it. A strange feeling suddenly arose in his heart, as if the skull statue before him were not a dead object, but a living being still breathing and drawing in energy. He slowly closed his eyes and released his divine sense. In an instant, it enveloped the entire stone chamber. Standing behind him, Luo Feng only felt an incomparably vast divine sense surge in from all directions, covering his whole body. He could not help but shudder, cold sweat breaking out on his temples as his clothes were quickly soaked through. Han Li paid no attention to Luo Feng, focusing all his mind on the skull statue. He discovered that around the blue skull existed a kind of energy invisible to the naked eye threads, as fine as spider silk. So weak that they seemed liable to disperse with a single wave of the hand, yet extremely numerous, densely filling the chamber and constantly converging toward the skull. At the same time, there was an invisible radiance on the skull itself, waxing and waning, moving in a rhythm identical to a cultivator's breathing, gradually absorbing the surrounding energy bit by bit. So this is faith power, Han Li withdrew his divine sense and murmured slowly. Behind him, Luo Feng's face was now pale. Only after taking several deep breaths did he barely steady himself. He stepped forward a few paces and lightly tapped an inverted pale blue stalactite that looked rather ordinary. The ground immediately trembled slightly, emitting creaking sounds. A small stone pedestal slowly rose up from the ground. On it rested a stone box. Luo Feng opened the box, took out an old jade tome, and offered it with both hands. "Senior Lu, this text may be of use to you. Please accept it." Han Li accepted it casually and swept it with his divine sense. His expression changed slightly. "Myriad Waters Immortal Art," he read the name slowly. Luo Feng said respectfully, "This is the cultivation method that ancestral god Luo Meng practiced back then. This junior once heard that immortals ascending from the lower realms require a true immortal cultivation art to transform their magic power into immortal spirit power. Senior entered the immortal realm illegally and likely does not yet possess a suitable technique, so this one may be of some help." Seeing the expectant look in Luo Feng's eyes, Han Li nodded lightly. Clan leader Luo Feng is thoughtful. He flipped through the jade tome briefly and quickly grasped its general contents. The Myriad Waters Immortal Art was a water-attributed true mortal cultivation method that could be cultivated up to the late true mortal stage. Unfortunately, it conflicted considerably with the techniques he was currently practicing, and moreover, its path of attainment did not align with his objectives. With this in mind, Han Li returned the jade tome to Luo Feng. Seeing this, Luo Feng revealed a surprised expression. "Senior Lu, could it be that this cultivation art, it does not suit me?" Han Li shook his head, then continued. "In the Black Wind Sea, are there any other places where one might find a true immortal cultivation method?" Luo Feng thought for a moment and replied, "The Black Wind Sea is remote, and immortal cultivation methods rarely circulate here. Most are held by ancestral gods and are not passed on to outsiders. If there is anywhere that might have immortal techniques, it would likely be Blackwind Island at the center of the sea region. Every 100 years, an auction grand meet is held there." "An auction grand meet," Han Li pondered. "When is the next one?" Han Li asked. "In a little over 10 years, Luo Feng answered. "More than 10 years?" Han Li nodded faintly, a contemplative look flashing through his eyes. "More than 10 years, I understand." Han Li nodded slightly, then added, "There is still one matter I need your help with." Hearing this, Luo Feng's expression shook, and he hurriedly replied, "Senior, please give your instructions." In the blink of an eye, 4 or 5 months passed. During this period, the Hangsing clan did not come to seek revenge at all, allowing all of Umeng Island to breathe a sigh of relief. Even so, inside the Great Hall, clan leader Luo Feng remained somewhat uneasy. He paced back and forth, occasionally stopping by the doorway to look into the distance, his face full of worry. Over these past few months, at Han Li's request, Luo Feng had dispatched people everywhere to collect secret techniques or cultivation methods related to imprisoning a nascent soul. Although such secret techniques were exceedingly rare, after many months, they finally managed to find 3 or 4 kinds. Unfortunately, after Han Li looked them over, he was dissatisfied with all of them. This made Luo Feng even more unsettled. With no other choice, he could only send a late integration stage elder from the clan carrying a large amount of spirit stones to Blackwind Island, the central island of the Blackwind Sea region, and also the most prosperous place in the area. If cultivators from other islands wanted to search for something, they basically all went to Blackwind Island. Today was already the 3rd day past the expected return date. Yet that elder still had not appeared. Just at this moment, a streak of white light suddenly appeared in the distant sky, rapidly flying toward Umeng Island. Luo Feng was overjoyed and hurried out of the Great Hall. The white light quickly descended before the main hall, revealing the figure of a middle-aged man. "Elder Han Liang, you finally returned. How did it go?" Luo Feng asked at once. "I ran into a bit of trouble on the way and had to take a detour, consuming more than half of the spirit stones. Fortunately, I did not fail the mission in the end." As he spoke, the middle-aged man took out a jade box. Inside were more than 10 jade slips. "Very good. You've worked hard. Go rest at once." Luo Feng let out a breath of relief, said a few words to the middle-aged man, then took the jade box and hurried toward Han Li's residence. Inside a secret chamber of the courtyard complex, crumpled drawing paper was scattered all over the floor. The table was also piled with sheets of paper, densely covered with talismanic symbols and complicated formation diagrams. Han Li sat at the table, brush in hand, rapidly drawing segments of talismanic script onto the paper. After a while, he raised his head, sighed, and set the brush down. Over the past few days, he had exhausted all his effort, combining his profound knowledge of formations with his cultivation experience to research the chains of laws. Unfortunately, he still had not gained any substantial results. Although he had come up with several conjectures that might unravel the chains of laws, most existed only in theory and were very difficult to carry out in practice. His greatest problem was that he did not understand what kind of laws the chains of laws actually contained. If he could clarify this point, there might be hope. Just then, a streak of white light shot in from outside and transformed into a voice transmission talisman. Han Li waved a hand and took it. The moment his divine sense probed into it, joy immediately appeared on his face. He stood up and quickly walked out. Not long after, Han Li returned to the secret chamber, now holding an additional jade box. He opened the box. Inside were more than 10 jade slips. Han Li picked up each jade slip in turn and pressed it to his forehead to examine it. After a while, his brows gradually knitted tightly. These jade slips all recorded secret techniques for sealing a nascent soul. They were indeed more profound than what he had obtained before, but compared to the chains of laws, they still offered very little help. Han Li let out a soft sigh. Given Luo Feng's small influence, being able to gather this much was already the limit. It seemed that after some more time, he would have to personally make a trip to Blackwind Island. As he was thinking this, Han Li picked up another jade slip and pressed it to his forehead. The moment he looked it over, his expression immediately turned grave. After a long time, he finally let out a slow breath, excitement flashing in his eyes. This jade slip recorded a secret art called the Severing Origin Heavenly Heart Refinement. This secret art did not directly target the nascent soul. Instead, it imprisoned magical power, yet its operating mechanism had similarities to the 8 black chains binding his nascent soul. At the end of the jade slip, it was clearly written that this secret art was derived from a type of law called the Severing Origin Law Chains. Severing Origin Law Chains, Han Li murmured softly. Could those 8 chains be this very law? Although he could not yet confirm it, Han Li knew that he had to study this secret art carefully. Perhaps this was the key to removing the seal around his nascent soul. He did not hesitate, pressing the jade slip to his forehead again and beginning a meticulous examination. A few days later, Luo Feng received Han Li's instructions and began gathering the various materials he needed. This eased Luo Feng's mind considerably. Although these materials were not of low value, the quantities required were not large, and most of them could be collected within the Blackwind Sea. Half a month later, the once quiet courtyard complex suddenly rang out with a series of dull explosions. Immediately afterward, more than 10 milky white pillars of light rose up around the inner courtyard, then rapidly transformed into a thick layer of white mist that completely enveloped the entire compound. The changes did not stop there. Around the courtyard, a vast expanse of yellow radiance emerged, condensing into a golden halo that wrapped around the outside of the white mist, covering the whole courtyard. Next, a series of sharp whistling sounds rang out. 7 or 8 enormous silver formation flags appeared, swaying gently. On the surface of the flags, countless silver characters emerged, then transformed into clusters of silvery mist clouds that tightly surrounded the courtyard. By this time, dusk had already fallen. The setting sun cast its light across Oming Island. Luo Feng and several elders stood on a high platform. Seeing the surging mist enveloping the courtyard, all of them showed expressions of astonishment. What is Senior Lu trying to do? Why is he causing such a huge disturbance? Han Liang could not help but ask. There is no need to think too much, and even less reason to ask questions, Luo Feng said in a low voice. Although the Blue Star clan has shown no movement for now, that is only on the surface. Moreover, other clans are also watching us closely. The safety of Oming Island now depends entirely on Senior Lu. Hearing this, the elders hurriedly voiced their agreement. From today onward, seal off all entrances and exits on the island and strengthen the guard. Recently, many suspicious individuals have appeared. Under no circumstances can anyone be allowed to disturb Senior Lu. Luo Feng continued issuing orders. Everyone responded in unison and then dispersed. Before long, only Luo Feng remained. He stood there, looking toward the courtyard complex, his expression shifting as he pondered something unknown. At this moment, inside the courtyard, on an open stretch of ground, a gigantic formation was slowly operating. On the ground, countless silver lines interwove, brightening and dimming intermittently. Around the formation, 7 massive pillars engraved with talismanic symbols were arranged in the Northern Dipper 7 Stars pattern. At a glance, the formation bore some resemblance to the star-gathering platform of Jingguan Temple. Han Li sat cross-legged at the very center of the formation, his body completely still. Time slowly passed. Soon, dusk turned into night, and darkness covered the entire island. Tonight, the stars in the sky were exceptionally bright, their starlight shimmering endlessly. Han Li raised his head and looked at the starry sky. A faint smile appeared at the corner of his mouth as he murmured softly. He waved his hand and sent a spell seal into the formation. Wang! The grand formation immediately erupted with dazzling radiance. Massive waves of spiritual power surged and trembled. Even with 3 layers of restrictions covering it, the fluctuations in spiritual energy could not be completely concealed. Han Li paid no attention to this and rapidly formed seals with both hands. The formation suddenly accelerated. The Northern Dipper 7 stars in the sky simultaneously blazed with light. Streams of starlight descended from the heavens, converging toward the courtyard and forming 7 enormous pillars of starlight. Puff, puff, puff. 7 dull sounds rang out in succession. From the 7 formation nodes, 7 beams of starlight shot forth, pouring into Han Li's lower abdomen, chest, and the space between his brows. Han Li raised his brows, a trace of pain flashing across his face. On his chest and abdomen, 7 clusters of stellar radiance lit up. Rolling starlight surged into his body, flashing before transforming into fine strands that traveled through his meridian. At the same time, the magical power within his dantian also began to circulate, running in parallel with the starlight through the meridians without any conflict. Han Li took a deep breath and formed seals with both hands. Within his meridians, countless white talismanic symbols appeared. Magical power, starlight, and talismans all lit up at once, slowly merging into a single entity, finally condensing into extremely fine silver threads of light that sped rapidly through his meridians. A special aura spread out from these threads of light. "I hope this works," Han Li murmured softly. The silver threads of light quickly converged toward the dantian, interweaving into a net of light that enveloped the nascent soul. In the next instant, the net began to tighten. At the same time, Han Li activated the spirit refinement art. Vast spiritual will poured into the dantian, transforming into countless fine strands of divine sense that passed through the gaps in the net of light and struck straight toward the nascent soul. Just as the light threads and fine strands of divine sense were about to make contact with the nascent soul, a streak of black light suddenly flashed. 8 black chains appeared on the surface of the nascent soul, vibrating violently, as if sensing a threat. Countless streams of black mist surged out, colliding with the silver threads of light and the fine strands of divine sense, producing continuous booming sounds. The silver threads and fine strands of divine sense were consumed extremely quickly. No one knew how much time passed before the black mist was finally torn apart. The 8 chains shook violently, and the black light on their surface rapidly dimmed. Joy surged in Han Li's heart. These silver threads of light were indeed effective against the black chains. He urged the fine strands of divine sense to condense into a gleaming black blade, which he brought down fiercely. Clang! Clang! Resounding metallic collision sounds rang out. The blade shattered into countless points of light, but the black chains shook even more violently. At that very moment, a sudden change occurred. From the void around Han Li, a segment of black chain abruptly appeared, flashing once before, plunging straight into his body. Crack! On the nascent soul, the 8 chains immediately twisted tightly together. On their surface, countless black talismanic symbols emerged, spinning rapidly as radiance shot out in all directions. The 2 hands of silver light threads that had just grasped the chains were pierced through by black light and instantly dissipated. The 2 giant axes condensed from the fine strands of divine sense also fractured, turning into points of light that scattered away. In the blink of an eye, all the previous efforts failed completely. In an instant, all the sudden changes came to an abrupt halt. Within the dantian, 9 black chains were tightly wrapped around Han Li's nascent soul. On the surface of the chains, countless tiny black runes continuously rotated, black light shooting out in all directions, completely suppressing the starlight and divine sense that had just formed. Han Li's expression darkened, but he did not panic. He gave a soft shout and urged all the remaining magical power in his body. The silver starlight within the dantian suddenly flared brightly, transforming into 8 enormous silver light hands that pierced through the remaining black runes and simultaneously grabbed hold of 8 of the black chains, pulling with all their might. In the blink of an eye, the 8 chains were pulled taut. A violent pain surged from the nascent soul. Han Li clenched his teeth, yet a subtle stir arose in his heart. Ever since his nascent soul had been sealed, he had almost completely lost all connection with it. But at this moment, he could faintly sense its existence once again. Without hesitation, Han Li immediately circulated the spirit refinement art. All the fine threads of divine sense flooded into the dantian, rapidly condensing into 2 gleaming giant axes. Silver arcs of lightning coiled around the axe bodies as they hacked fiercely at the taut black chains. Boom! A deafening explosion rang out. Fine cracks appeared on the surface of the black chains. Joy surged in Han Li's heart, and he continuously urged the giant axes to chop down again. At that very moment, another sudden change occurred. From the void around his body, space abruptly trembled. Another segment of black chain appeared out of nowhere, flashed once, and then plunged straight into Han Li's body. The starlight grand formation surrounding him seemed utterly unable to stop it. Crack! Inside the dantian, the 9 black chains immediately twisted tightly together. Dense black runes emerged on their surface, spinning violently as black light burst forth, directly shattering the 2 silver light hands that were gripping the chains. The two gleaming giant axes that had just chopped down also instantly fractured, turning into countless points of light that dissipated. At the same time, deep within a great hall in the desert of the Immortal Realm, a man whose body was stiff like a corpse slowly extended one hand forward. His entire body was shrouded in dazzling black light, countless black runes flickering and dancing. The black chains coiled around his body rattled violently, like innumerable crazed tentacles lashing against the floor and walls of the great hall, producing dull, booming sounds. After a moment, the man slowly lowered his arm. The black light on his body rapidly dissipated, and the chains gradually calmed down, scattering loosely across the ground. One last time, the man murmured softly, then slowly closed his eyes. Back in the small courtyard on Umeng Island, Han Li suddenly sprang to his feet. Blue light flickered in his eyes as his divine sense shot out at once, enveloping the entirety of Umeng Island and the surrounding sea region for several thousand li. After a round of probing, he detected no abnormalities. Only after a long while did Han Li slowly withdraw his divine sense, his expression gloomy. That segment of black chain just now had clearly been manifested by an incomparably powerful existence from afar, using divine abilities to reinforce the seal on his nascent soul across space. The opponent's cultivation far exceeded his original estimates. Han Li fell silent for a moment, when a thought suddenly flashed through his mind. Without hesitation, he immediately urged his divine sense to envelop the Dantian, forming layers of starlight around the nascent soul, hoping to conceal part of its connection with the outside world. After completing all this, Han Li slowly sat down cross-legged. He flipped his hand and took out a 1,000-year-old cloud crane grass, stuffed it into his mouth, and chewed and swallowed it in large bites, beginning to regulate his breathing and recover. Although this attempt ultimately failed, it still brought him a gratifying result. The method of fusing starlight and magical power truly could shake the black chains. If he had sufficient magical power, even if the opponent reinforced the seal once more, it was not certain that he would be unable to forcibly break it. 1 month later, in a quiet garden on Umeng Island, at night, 7 enormous white pillars of light descended from the sky, enveloping the entire small courtyard. Han Li sat cross-legged in the center of the courtyard, his eyes tightly closed. Around him, countless white points of light like fireflies fluttered about, lightly touching his body before swiftly soaring upward. A thin layer of white light, like silk, covered the entire garden, within which spread a dense yet gentle spiritual force. Gradually, the 7 clusters of blue radiance on Han Li's body extinguished one by one. The surrounding white light dissipated accordingly, and the 7 sky-piercing pillars of light vanished in succession. Han Li slowly opened his eyes, raised his head to look at the starry sky, and a faint, bitter smile appeared on his face. As expected, it still doesn't work. Over the past month, he had tried every possible method to increase the magical power within his body, yet all of them had failed. Recently, he had continued cultivating the Little Big Dipper Star Origin art, hoping to enhance the power of the 5 Viscera Origin Palace, but the 7 great mysterious apertures within his body had long since reached saturation and could no longer accommodate additional stellar power. Han Li let out a sigh, his gaze gradually growing contemplative. At that moment, as he looked up at the Northern Dipper 7 stars in the sky, his heart suddenly shook violently. A thought flashed through his mind. The moment that thought flashed through his mind, Han Li felt his heart pound heavily. If he could not directly increase his own magical power, then why not cultivate through an avatar instead? Han Li raised a hand to stroke his chin and took a few steps around the courtyard. His eyes gradually brightened. By using an avatar to accumulate magical power and then feeding it back to the main body, he could avoid the problem of his nascent soul being sealed within his current body. As long as the avatar possessed sufficient magical power, he could fully borrow that strength to forcibly break the black chains. The only crucial question was, where would this avatar come from? Han Li quickly dismissed the option of condensing a second nascent soul. Although the Profound Mother Nascent Soul Transformation Grand Art could achieve this, its requirements were far too harsh, and the time and effort it consumed were excessive, completely unsuitable for his current situation. The other avatar techniques he knew also required extremely long periods of incubation, and could not be used immediately. Just as he was hesitating, the image of the skull statue in the Forbidden Ground suddenly appeared in Han Li's mind. An Earth Manifestation avatar was also a type of avatar. Han Li's eyes immediately lit up. That's it, he spoke softly, having already made his decision. Han Li flicked his sleeve, sending out a streak of radiance that transformed into a voice transmission talisman, flying toward the northwestern Forbidden Ground of Umeng Island. Not long after, within the Forbidden Hall beneath the seabed, the figures of Han Li and Luo Feng appeared at the same time. Luo Feng followed behind Han Li, his expression a mix of confusion and unease. He had been in seclusion cultivating when he suddenly received the voice transmission and rushed over immediately, feeling restless in his heart. "Senior Lu, you summoned me to this forbidden ground. Do you have some important matter?" Luo Feng could not help but ask. Han Li only replied briefly, "There are a few things I need to ask you." After speaking, he walked straight to the stone pedestal, reached out, lifted the pale blue skull statue, and placed it before him, examining it intently. A moment later, blue light flickered in his eyes as one finger slowly pointed toward the center of the skull's brow. Seeing this, Luo Feng's heart jolted. He subconsciously stepped forward, his mouth opening slightly, but in the end, he still did not dare to stop him. The instant Han Li's fingertip touched the skull's brow, an invisible radiance immediately spread out, rippling outward like waves on water. This radiance was neither fierce nor destructive, but the moment it touched his body, Han Li was violently shaken. His expression changed slightly, revealing disbelief. To his astonishment, the nascent soul, bound by chains within his body, actually resonated with the radiance from the skull. The nascent soul trembled in faint waves. Although the amplitude was small, the sensation was extremely clear. Han Li pondered for a brief moment. Suddenly, green light flared in his hand as a stream of pure magical power was guided from his fingertip and directly infused into the skull statue. An immediate change occurred within the skull. Faith power, accumulated over many years, seemed to be stimulated, surging and swirling violently, forming invisible currents that collided with one another. Amid them, several pale blue strands of magical power were suddenly forced out and directly collided with Han Li's green magical power. Unfortunately, those pale blue strands were far too fragile. The moment they made contact, they dissipated like mist. Yet Han Li showed no disappointment. On the contrary, joy surged in his heart. He withdrew his hand, turned to look at Luo Feng, and asked directly, "Back then, aside from using the power of laws, was the Earth Manifestation Avatar of Umeng Island's ancestral god able to employ any other divine abilities?" Seeing that the strange phenomenon had vanished and the skull was unharmed, Luo Feng finally let out a silent sigh of relief. Hearing Han Li's question, he immediately replied, "Although Lord Luomeng's Earth Manifestation Avatar did not possess a nascent soul, it could convert faith power into magical power, so it was also able to cast other spells. So that's how it is," Han Li murmured as he thought. It seemed that when an Earth Manifestation Avatar absorbed faith power, it was not only used to condense the power of laws, but could also be transformed into ordinary magical power. In other words, if he refined his own Earth Manifestation Avatar and then used faith power to accumulate magical power, gradually replenishing the main body, it was very likely to help his nascent soul completely break free from the binding of those mysterious chains. Moreover, just now, the faith power within the skull had actually resonated with the sealed nascent soul in his body. This indicated that the Earth Manifestation Avatar path might conceal additional effects he had never considered before. However, Han Li was also very clear. Once one embarked on the path of an Earth Immortal, the magical power within the body could easily be contaminated by faith power. If mishandled, he could permanently become an Earth Immortal, with no possibility of returning to his original cultivation path. But if he could wait until the nascent soul broke free from the seal while his magical power had not yet been eroded by faith power, and then promptly sever the Earth Immortal cultivation path, it might not be impossible to withdraw safely. Han Li slowly took a deep breath. A resolute light flashed in his eyes. This episode ends here.